The vote was already decided before I walked into the hall. I could feel it in the air, the way you feel rain before it arrives. Heavy, certain. The Grand Conclave Hall of Veritha's Station had hosted 1,000 decisions over the centuries, and most of them had been made in back rooms long before the representatives took their seats. Today was no different. The Keth Dominion had the numbers. They had made sure of that. I was the last human to enter. Every eye in that hall followed me, and there were a great many eyes. Some of them had 3. I walked to the human delegation seat, which sat at the far left of the curved chamber as it always had, as if we had been an afterthought in the architecture. Maybe we had been. The hall was beautiful, I had to admit that. Tall columns of crystalline stone stretched up to a vaulted ceiling where light moved like slow water. The representatives of 41 species sat in tiered rows, their bodies ranging from barely visible wisps of organized gas to creatures so large their seats had been specially reinforced. Council Chair Aluvan presided from the central dais, his long silver fingers folded together, his 4 pale eyes calm and satisfied. He had already won. He just needed me to sit down and let it happen. I did not sit down. Ambassador Solis, Aluvan said, his translator producing a tone that was always somehow both polite and dismissive. You are the last to arrive. Please take your seat so we may begin. I will not be sitting today, I said. That got a reaction. Heads turned. Several of the Aurelian representatives shifted in their seats, their bioluminescent markings flickering with surprise. The Siphon Collective's 3-bodied delegate cluster drew closer together. Aluvan blinked all 4 eyes slowly. Ambassador, the Protectorate mandate is a matter of galactic security. It requires the full participation of all member species. Then you will have a problem, I said, because humanity is no longer a member species. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and removed a data chip. It was small, barely the size of my thumbnail. I had spent 4 months preparing what was on it, working with the Terran Council of 12, with economists, historians, engineers, and diplomats. Every figure had been checked 3 times. Every record had been verified. I walked to the center of the floor and set it down on the smooth stone. On that chip, I said, speaking clearly so that every translator in the room could keep pace, you will find a complete accounting. 207 years of humanity's contributions to this council, measured against what we have received in return. Every medical technology we shared, every navigation system we built, every famine we helped end on worlds that are not ours, every life our people gave protecting convoys and colonies that the history files later credited to someone else. I let that last sentence land. Aluvan's expression did not change, but I saw his fingers unfold. Alongside that accounting, I continued, you will find the formal notification of humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, effective as of the timestamp on this chip. All treaties are revoked. All trade agreements are terminated. All mutual defense pacts are dissolved. All cooperative accords, technology-sharing arrangements, and humanitarian commitments are ended. Every human diplomatic, scientific, and aid worker stationed in Council space has already been recalled. The process began 6 days ago. Another silence, longer this time. Then, from the Keth section, the deep grinding voice of High Delegate Vaughn cut through the room. This is theater. You cannot simply walk away from 2 centuries of agreements. There are legal frameworks. There are processes. There were also processes, I said, when the Veritha's report was filed. There were legal frameworks when our soldiers held the Reach Corridor for 11 days and died doing it, and when the official record was submitted to this council with their names removed and a Keth battalion listed as the primary force. I am aware of all the processes, High Delegate. I helped write several of them. Vaughn had no answer for that, neither did anyone else. I picked up my travel case from beside the empty chair. I straightened my jacket. I looked at Aluvan one last time. The chip is yours, I said, Read it carefully, all of it. I walked to the exit. No one moved to stop me. I think they were still waiting for the part where I sat down and allowed the vote to proceed, where humanity absorbed the indignity quietly and smiled and signed whatever was put in front of us, as we had done so many times before. That part did not come. The doors of the grand conclave hall closed behind me, with a sound like a held breath finally released. In the corridor outside, my aide, a young man named Oliver Crane, fell into step beside me. He had been waiting there for 40 minutes, which told me he had understood from the moment I explained the plan that I would not be inside very long. "The fleet is holding at the reach boundary," he said quietly. "Good," I said. "The council is going to be very loud about this." "Let them be loud," I said. "Loud is all they have right now." We walked toward the docking bay. Behind us, through the thick crystalline walls, I could already hear voices rising. They did not understand yet. That was fine, they would. The ISV Steadfast was a long, gray vessel that had never been designed for ceremony. It had no sweeping lines or decorative flourishes. It looked exactly like what it was: a ship built for distance, for endurance, for the kind of quiet, sustained effort that no one ever wrote songs about. I loved it for that. I was at my desk in the command suite before we cleared Veritha's station's docking corridor. Oliver had set up the monitoring feeds without being asked, which was why he was still employed. Across 4 screens, I watched the council's internal diplomatic channels erupt. I want to be clear about something. I did not enjoy watching them panic. I am telling this story honestly, and honesty requires me to say that there was no satisfaction in seeing confusion and fear spread through 41 delegations. What I felt was something colder than satisfaction. It was recognition. The recognition that comes when something you have known for a very long time is finally, visibly, undeniably true for everyone else as well. The Keth Dominion's reaction was the fastest. Within 90 minutes of my departure from the hall, their military coordination channel, which we had been passively monitoring for years with technology the council did not know we had, registered a priority alert. I watched the text scroll across Oliver's secondary screen. Fuel processor enzyme supply chain. Origin confirmed as Terran Biological Solutions. Contract status now showing terminated. I had not expected them to hit that particular wall so quickly. The Keth ran their warship drives on a fuel refinement process that required a specific biological catalyst to function at operational efficiency. Without it, the process still worked, but at roughly 62% of normal output. The catalyst had been developed by a human biochemist named Petra Holt about 30 years ago. The Keth had been licensing it so quietly, through so many layers of corporate intermediaries, that most of their own admiralty probably did not know where it came from. They knew now. The Aurelian choir was slower to react, which I had expected. The choir operated on consensus, every decision flowing through a lengthy process of harmonic agreement between their governing bodies. But when their agricultural oversight network finally registered the implications of our withdrawal, the result was spectacular. 14 colony worlds. 14 worlds where the grain had been growing for a decade from seed strains developed by human agronomists and licensed on renewable annual contracts. Those contracts had just expired and would not be renewed. It was not a famine. I want to be clear about that. The strains would produce one more full harvest. There was time. But the choir had to face the reality that after that harvest, they would be replanting from their own older, less resilient stock on worlds that had been terraformed using techniques partially designed by humans, in ecosystems that had been stabilized using methods from a human environmental sciences report that was now, technically, proprietary and no longer shared. The Siphon Collective's crisis was the most dramatic and also the most visible because it happened in a way that anyone with a standard communications receiver could see. The Siphon ran the interstellar financial network. Transfers, currency exchange, credit verification, trade ledger confirmation across 38 star systems. It was the economic circulatory system of the Council's territory. What very few people outside of a small room in the Terran Economic Ministry knew was that the quantum encryption backbone of that network had been rebuilt 11 years ago after a catastrophic security breach. The siphon had come to humanity quietly, desperate, and we had solved the problem for them. The solution was elegant. It was also ours, and the maintenance access keys had just been revoked. 3 of the siphon's major trade hubs went dark within 6 hours. Not catastrophically, not permanently, but visibly and unmistakably dark. Transfer queues halted. Credit verification processes timed out. Cargo ships sat at docking stations waiting for clearance that could not be processed. The siphon's own engineers were scrambling to understand a system they had been running for 11 years without ever fully learning how it worked, because it had always worked, and they had never needed to learn. I watched all of it from my desk on the Steadfast, drinking tea that had gone cold, and I thought about a word. That word was infrastructure. Everyone understood military power. Everyone understood economic leverage. Everyone talked about alliances and treaties and the balance of force. But no one talked about infrastructure, about the invisible, unglamorous, essential work of building the systems that everything else ran on. Humanity had been doing that work for 2 centuries. We had done it because it was right, because cooperation was valuable, because a stable galaxy was better than a chaotic one. We had done it and asked for very little in return, and when we did ask, we were told that we were junior partners, that we were still developing, that our concerns would be addressed in the next session, in the next cycle, in the next century. Meanwhile, our people died in the Reach, and their names were erased from the record. Oliver appeared in the doorway. He had a tablet and an expression that was carefully professional, which meant he had feelings about something and was managing them with great discipline. Council Chair Aluvan has sent a priority communication, he said. He is requesting a call. Log it, I said. Ambassador, he has sent 4 communications in the last 3 hours. Log them all, I said. Is the recall complete? He checked his tablet. 39,812 personnel confirmed aboard returning vessels. Final group departs Aurelian space in approximately 4 hours. I thought about those people, scientists who had spent years working on shared research projects, doctors running clinics on species that were not their own, engineers who had built things and taught others to build things and believed, genuinely and sincerely, that they were part of something worth believing in. They had not been wrong to believe that. The idea of cooperation was worth believing in. It was the specific institution of this specific council, in the hands of these specific powers, that had proven itself something else entirely. They were coming home now, all of them, quietly in organized groups on ships that had been prepositioned 6 days ago when the plan was finalized. 4 hours, I said. Then we stopped monitoring the council channels. Oliver blinked. Stop monitoring entirely. We are no longer members, I said. We have no standing to monitor their internal communications. We will behave accordingly. He stood very still for a moment, then he nodded. The Steadfast moved through open space, homeward, and behind us, the council's channels continued to burn with voices that were growing less arrogant and more afraid with every hour that passed. We hadn't been their partners. We had been their infrastructure. And infrastructure, when it walks away, leaves a hole shaped exactly like civilization. The first offer arrived before we reached the halfway point home. It came from the Keth Dominion, transmitted on a diplomatic frequency that was supposed to be reserved for emergency communications between heads of government. They had used it because they wanted me to understand the level of seriousness they were applying to the situation, or perhaps because it was the only frequency they were confident I was still monitoring. They were correct on both counts. High Delegate Vaughan's message was not humble. I had not expected it to be. The Keth did not do humble. Instead, it was formal and precise in the way that a demand dressed as an offer tends to be. 3 star systems, he said. Disputed territories in the outer reach that humanity had long expressed interest in. Survey rights, settlement rights, full legal sovereignty. In exchange, humanity would return to the Council, withdraw the withdrawal, and restore the enzyme supply chain. 3 star systems. 200 years ago, when humanity had first made contact with the broader galactic community, we would have celebrated that offer for a generation. We would have held parades. We would have written it into school books. I forwarded the message to the Terran Council of 12 and did not reply to Vaughan. The Aurelian choir's offer came 4 hours later. It was gentler in tone, because the choir was always gentler in tone, and it offered something they called eternal cultural recognition, which, when parsed through the diplomatic language, meant that humanity would be formally acknowledged in the choir's sacred historical archives as a foundational contributing civilization. Our name would be sung in their ceremonial cycles. Our name would be sung. I forwarded that one too and did not reply. The Sci-Fi Collective's offer was the most genuinely interesting. They offered economic co-dominance, a restructuring of the interstellar financial network that would place humanity as a co-administrator with full access rights, equal authority, shared revenue from transaction processing across all 38 systems. It was, in pure numerical terms, an extraordinary amount of money and power. It was also, I noted, exactly what we should have been offered 11 years ago when we rebuilt their network for them. Instead of offering it then, they had said thank you, paid the licensing fee, and filed the blueprints in a vault somewhere, and assumed they would never need to think about it again. I sat in my quarters that evening, the steadfast humming steadily around me, and I thought about all 3 offers. Each of them had one thing in common. They were all designed to return humanity to the same position we had occupied before. Useful, present, plugged in, but still fundamentally answerable to a structure that had never genuinely respected us. A better cage was still a cage. My communication board lit up with a request I had not expected. It was not from one of the Council's major powers. The origin code belonged to the Uri, a species I knew primarily from reports, small, bipedal, excellent engineers, operating about 6 star systems in a region that the Keth Dominion had spent decades slowly economically strangling. The Uri had been council members for 80 years and had never once held a senior committee position. Their requests were routinely tabled. Their complaints were routinely noted and filed. The message was short. It said, "We are not surprised. We have been waiting for this moment for a long time. If humanity is willing to speak with those who have also been overlooked, we would very much like to talk." I read it twice. Then I read the second message, which had arrived 6 minutes later from the Dendry, a species I knew slightly better. Tall, slow-moving, exceptional at long-range resource mapping, operating in 4 systems on the Council's eastern border where they had been systematically excluded from the resource extraction agreements that would have made them wealthy. The Dendry message was longer but said essentially the same thing. They were not begging. They were not desperate. They were reaching out from a place of quiet recognition, from one overlooked party to another. I called Oliver into my quarters. "I need you to pull every file we have on the Uri and the Dendry," I said. "Economic situation, political structure, technology capacity, resource holdings, everything." He pulled up his tablet. "Are we considering a response to their messages?" "We are considering more than a response," I said. He worked quietly for a while. I watched the stars outside the viewport, which at this speed appeared as long, pale lines. "Ambassador," Oliver said, after about 20 minutes, "the Uri have 3 functional shipyards." I turned away from the viewport. "Say that again." 3 functional shipyards, mid-capacity, capable of producing vessels up to heavy cruiser class. They have been operating them quietly for the past 30 years, apparently without filing the full disclosure reports required by council membership. The council's inspection bureau flagged it twice, and both times the report was shelved. I sat forward, and the Dendry control 6 moons in their border systems that have never been formally surveyed, but based on the spectral analysis in their own unpublished geological records, which we have in our archive from a data-sharing initiative 15 years ago. Those moons contain enough rare element deposits to supply a significant industrial operation for decades. I looked at him for a long moment. They have been hiding their capabilities, I said. It appears so, Oliver said, which means the Council has been treating them as minor powers when they may not be minor at all. Or they made themselves look minor, I said, because looking minor was safer. I understood that instinct very well. The Terran Council of 12 met the following day via secure channel. I laid out everything. The 3 major offers, the messages from the Uri and Dendry, the hidden capabilities, the picture that was beginning to form. Council Prime Harriet Cole listened with the particular stillness she had when she was thinking hard about something she had not yet decided. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that missed very little, and she had been governing humanity's affairs for 11 years with a combination of patience and precision that I deeply respected. When I finished, she said, "You are not suggesting we accept any of the 3 offers." "No," I said. "You are suggesting we respond to the Uri and the Dendry." "I am suggesting we invite them to Earth," I said. "And I am suggesting we find out who else has been playing small because the Council made it dangerous to play big." There was a pause on the channel. Then Council member Philip Drake, who handled resource and economic affairs and who was constitutionally skeptical of optimism, said, "If this works, it fundamentally changes the architecture of power in this region of space." "Yes," I said, "that is rather the point." Another pause. "Do it," Harriet said. The message went out to the Uri and the Dendry that afternoon. It was short, direct, and written without diplomatic softening of any kind. "Come to Earth. Bring your grievances. Bring your actual capabilities. Let us talk about what comes next." Every empire thinks it is indispensable. The Council had confused our generosity for dependency. It was time to show them the difference. The Uri delegation arrived first. Their ship was not what I expected, and I had worked hard not to form expectations. I stood at the observation deck of New Geneva's diplomatic landing facility and watched it come in, and what I saw was a vessel that was clearly built for function rather than impression. Clean lines, efficient use of space, no decorative elements whatsoever. The engineering was better than the exterior suggested. I had read enough of the technical files by then to know that the Uri had been deliberately constructing their public-facing technology to look less capable than it was. Ambassador Lena Voss from our diplomatic corps met them at the ramp. She was one of our most experienced people, calm under any pressure, fluent in 4 galactic trade languages. She told me later that the Uri delegation leader, a woman whose name translated approximately as Saren of the Third Harbor, had stepped off the ramp and immediately said, "We were told you would not waste our time. We have very little patience left for wasted time." Lena had said, "Neither do we, let us go inside." They liked that. The Dendry arrived 2 days later, their much larger vessel settling onto the extended landing pad with a careful precision that spoke to excellent pilots. The Dendry delegation was led by an elder statesman whose title translated as something between keeper and long memory, a tall, slow-speaking figure who had apparently been involved in Dendry affairs for over 100 years. He arrived with 12 advisors and a data archive that required its own transport cart. I met them personally in the main reception hall of the Terran diplomatic quarter. The hall had been built to impress, all high ceilings and warm lighting, and the kind of architectural weight that said permanence and seriousness. I had always found it slightly excessive, but today it served its purpose. Ambassador Solis, the keeper said, his translator giving his voice a deep, measured quality, we have read your accounting, the one you left on the floor of the conclave hall. I hope it was informative, I said. It confirmed what we already knew, he said. But seeing it written down by the party who was wronged is different from knowing it privately. It made something real that had only been a wound before. I took a moment with that. Then I said, we brought our own wounds. I think between us there may be enough to build something new. The 3 days of meetings that followed were unlike anything in my diplomatic experience. There was no ceremonial positioning, no slow maneuvering for advantage, no careful language designed to commit to nothing. The URI laid out their actual capabilities within the first 4 hours. Lena told me later she had never seen a species discard their defensive posture so completely so quickly. 3 shipyards. 22 functional warships of their own construction, considerably more advanced than their council-registered vessels. A network of engineers and scientists who had been quietly developing technology for decades while presenting their public research as far more primitive. They had been afraid. That was the simple truth of it. The Keth Dominion had made clear over many decades that any species that became too capable, too independently powerful, could expect to find itself facing economic strangulation or trumped-up security hearings in the council chamber. So the URI had hidden. They had played small and survived. The Dendry's hidden resource wealth, when the keeper's advisors shared the full geological surveys, was even larger than our initial analysis had suggested. 6 moons. The deposits were remarkable, not just rare elements but entire categories of material that were currently expensive to source and essential to advanced manufacturing. The Dendry had known about them for 60 years and had told no one, because the moment the council powers knew, the resource extraction agreements would appear, written in the council's favor, and the Dendry would receive a royalty percentage barely large enough to maintain their own infrastructure. They had been protecting what was theirs by pretending it did not exist. On the second day, Council Prime Harriet Cole joined the meetings via secure visual link. She listened far more than she spoke, but when she did speak, the URI and Dendry both paid close attention. There was something about Harriet that commanded it. Not loudness, not authority for its own sake, but the quality of someone who had thought carefully about everything she was about to say before she said it. On the 3rd day, Philip Drake arrived in person with his resource and economics team. He spread out models on the table showing what a genuine, equitable partnership between 3 species with complementary capabilities might produce over a 20-year horizon. The numbers were significant. More than significant. They were the kind of numbers that could change who had leverage and who did not in a very large region of space. At the end of the 3rd day, the keeper said, "You have not asked us to agree to anything yet." "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because we want you to trust what you agreed to," I said. "That takes longer than 3 days. We want to show you the real terms, the real framework, everything written plainly so that nothing is hidden. Then we want you to go home, review it, consult with your own people and come back with your questions and your concerns. We are not in a hurry." Saren of the 3rd Harbor, who had been quiet for the last hour, said, "The council was always in a hurry when they wanted something from us. They had no time for our questions." "We have time," I said. On the 4th day, while the delegations were resting, the council's desperation reached a new level. Aluvan sent a message directly to Harriet, bypassing me entirely, which I noted as a sign that they had finally understood I was not going to respond to their communications. The message was long and formally worded, but stripped of its diplomatic language, it said essentially this: "We will give you whatever you want. Just come back and help us hold this together." Harriet read it, showed it to me, and filed it. Quietly, over the following weeks, 4 more species made contact. Not the Council's major powers, not the Keth or the Aurelian or the Siphon, but smaller members. species in the middle and outer regions who had watched humanity walk out of the conclave hall and felt something they had not felt in a long time. Something like hope. The framework that became the Terran Accord was not written quickly. I want to make that clear because there is a version of this story where a few smart people in a room produce a perfect document, and everyone signs it and history is immediately transformed. That is not what happened. What happened was months of conversations, revisions, arguments, walkbacks, late nights, early mornings, and the very unglamorous work of building something that was meant to last. The core principles were simple, and we held to them even when individual negotiations pushed against them. Every member species would have equal vote on matters affecting the group. No member could hold another in economic dependency without that member's full informed consent. Technology shared within the Accord was shared fully, with complete technical documentation, not as a black box. Resource agreements would be audited by a joint body with rotating membership. Any species could leave the Accord, with full advance notice and a clear exit process, and would retain everything they had contributed. That last one was important to me personally. One of the things that had made our position in the old council so difficult was that over 2 centuries of cooperation, we had built so many interdependencies that leaving felt impossible. We had made the Accord structure so that leaving was always possible. If it worked, no one would want to leave, but the option needed to be real. The Uri signed first. Saren of the Third Harbor signed on behalf of her people in a small ceremony in the new Geneva Council chamber, and afterward she said to me quietly, "We have spent 80 years being told our concerns were noted. Today someone actually wrote them down and changed them." The Dendry Keeper signed 3 days later. He brought the full archive of geological surveys and handed it to Philip Drake in person as part of the formal exchange of information. It took 3 assistants to carry it. Philip, who was not a demonstrative person, stood very still when he understood what he was holding, and then he said, "Thank you," and meant it in a way that went far beyond politeness. Over the following months, 4 more species joined. 2 of them had been council members for decades. 2 had been associate members, technically part of the structure but without full voting rights, a category that had always struck me as a polite way of saying you are here but you do not quite count. Accord Station was constructed in neutral space between humanity's territory and the Uri's nearest system. It was built by human engineers working alongside Uri engineers, using Dendry materials, designed in a style that was none of the 3 cultures and therefore belonged to all of them. It was not beautiful in the way that Veritha's station was beautiful. It was practical, efficient, well-lit, and designed so that every delegation suite was the same size. No one was given a seat at the far left of the curve. The opening ceremony was not large. I had pushed for something modest, and I had prevailed. The people who had done the real work were there. Lena Voss, who had managed more of the relationship building than anyone would ever fully know. Oliver Crane, who had not slept properly in 4 months and who had the quiet satisfaction of someone who had carried something heavy for a long time and had finally been allowed to set it down. Philip Drake, standing next to the Keeper's chief economic advisor, the 2 of them already deep in a conversation about rare element processing that would probably produce something useful. Saren of the Third Harbor, standing at the viewport of the main hall with her 3 closest advisors, looking out at the stars with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of someone who had stopped pretending they were smaller than they were. I spoke briefly. I did not give a long speech. The moment did not need one. I said that what we had built here was not the answer to every problem. It was not a guarantee of peace or prosperity for anyone. What it was honest. Every term was visible. Every voice had weight. Every member had chosen to be here, and every member could choose to leave, and the hope was that none of them would want to. After the ceremony, Council Chair Eluvan sent one final personal message. Not through official channels, not on a priority frequency. A simple direct communication, addressed to me by name. It said, "You could have warned us. I sat with that for a while. I thought about 200 years. I thought about the Reach, about the soldiers whose names had been removed from a record, about the enzyme catalyst and the grain strains and the quantum encryption backbone. I thought about every meeting where our concerns had been noted and filed, every session where we had been asked to be patient, every moment where we had continued to give because the alternative was abandonment. I wrote back one sentence. We did for 200 years. I sent it and closed the channel. Outside the viewport of my office on a cord station, the first Uri trade ship was making its approach. It was a small vessel, battered around the edges in the way that working ships always are, carrying supplies and equipment for the station's eastern wing. At the top of its hull, catching the light from the nearby star, was the Uri flag, full-sized, unobscured, flying the way a flag flies when no one has told it to be smaller. I watched it dock, and I thought about what Harriet had said to me once early in this process, when I had asked her if she thought it would work. She had been quiet for a moment, and then she had said, "I think people who have been told for a long time that they are less than they are become extraordinary when someone finally tells them the truth." She had been right. They asked me later, in interviews and in the histories that started being written embarrassingly quickly, whether I had planned it all from the beginning, whether the whole sequence, the walkout, the withdrawal, the offers we refused, the Uri and Dendry, the accord, had been mapped out in advance like a strategy on a board. I told them the truth. I had not planned it. I had simply reached a point where I could no longer pretend. I could not pretend that the accounting was fair. I could not pretend that the Veritha's record was acceptable. I could not pretend that we were partners in an arrangement that had never been structured to treat us as such. And when I stopped pretending, it turned out that a great many other people had been waiting for someone to stop. That was all it took. I just stopped pretending. Turns out that was enough to change everything.